Rube, we live in New Orleans now. I don't know what day it is anymore, but we're doing well. How are you?
Dave's getting his mail delivered to him here in NOLA. Yeah, we've been here. I guess we've only been here a few days, but it seems like longer than that.
Yeah, it's a long week, a lot going on. This is our first pod since the craziness of opening night. It's kind of a spectacle, but we did learn a lot. So we'll go through some of those things, and then the Eagles had another availability on Tuesday. We were both there for that. So a lot to get to in this one, a bunch of questions from you guys later. You're sending them faster than we can answer them, so I guess that's a good thing. I feel like I'm drowning in those questions a little bit, but that's okay.
Keep them coming.
Yeah, keep them coming. We appreciate it. Rube, the other thing, personal update, my allergies. There's a good chance during this podcast I'm going to be sneezing. I didn't think about this, but we're down here at 70 degrees. Things are blooming. My body doesn't like that.
Well, you have kind of a history of unwellness at Super Bowls.
I was so nervous I was getting sick last night, and then this morning it was actually a relief that my throat was scratchy, my eyes were watering.
So it was a relief.
It's allergies.
Okay.
Let's get to opening night. It's just wild. It's how do we explain it to people who haven't seen? We usually call it media night. The NFL calls it Super Bowl opening night. How would you describe it to someone who's never experienced it?
I would describe it as an arena filled with noise, just constant noise, humanity, screeching volume level, nowhere to move, nowhere to walk, people running into people and trampling them, and TV cameras everywhere knocking you in the head, and more people than you've ever seen before in your life, and none of them have any means to go anywhere. Nobody can hear anybody. It's chaos.
It's chaos. Kind of fun in a weird way. You feel like you lived through a battle after getting through a media night. And there was one point on Monday evening that I was like being moved against my consent, but it was like a wave of
humanity.
People taking me one way. The cool thing, though, about these opening nights, at least this one was a little different because it's at the Superdome. The field is completely blocked off for all the media members, which leaves like a track around the actual field, so kind of a confined space. But every single player, every single coach on that staff has to be available, and they are there. So it's a great opportunity to talk to people we don't normally get to talk to. Numero uno on that list for the Philadelphia Eagles is owner Jeffrey Lurie. Typically, we get to talk to him once a year at the owners' meetings. The only time he talks other than that is when they're in the Super Bowl and he talks at media night.
Yeah, and I kind of figured out where he was going to be sitting. There was a chair there. I kind of figured it all out and got a good spot right in front of him, and hung in there for a good 30, 35 minutes. And I told him, I actually told him I wish he talked more often, because I mean, the guy is leading one of the most successful franchises in the NFL of the last quarter century, and I find his process really interesting. I find the way he thinks very interesting. He's always very forward-looking, and certainly some of the things he talked about fall into that category. I wish he talked more often, but
there's got to be a balance. Like, there's got to be a middle ground between what he does and what Jerry Jones does, right?
Yeah,
Jerry you don't need him talking after every game.
No, he used to.
Jeffrey Lurie
used to be in a locker room after every game. He was available to the media.
Wow, yeah. Like when he first bought the team?
When he first bought the team. But
how long did that last?
It lasted a few years. Yeah.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I think into the Andy Reid era, and then it was like maybe you'd see him once a month and maybe once a season. And
that's fascinating. Do you think that was because Andy had a big enough personality to speak for the franchise?
I do. Wow. I think that's exactly what it was. But when he does speak, I always enjoy it, and it was a good conversation, certainly last night.
Yeah. Take me through some of the big takeaways. I think the most pressing question was whether or not he's going to buy the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, and I think it's good news for Eagles fans that he said no, I'm not interested. It's kind of funny. When do you ever hear somebody you're interested? I'm really not thinking about buying another pro sports franchise right now. Like, whoever gets to say that? But yeah, he said he's not interested. He's 77. And like you could make a case that he was kind of grooming Julian, his son, who's been working for the organization, to take over if he did leave, and kind of bought the Celtics and spent most of his time on that. But he was pretty adamant that he's not interested. He got that question a couple other times, and he answered the same way. It's not what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I guess the connection is just obviously we know he's a Boston guy. He's from there. He certainly spoke with a lot of reverence about that organization. But, yeah, I think that is good news for Eagles fans, because we see what it does to have Josh Harris owning different teams in different markets.
Yeah.
It kind of like waters it down, and it makes me feel a little icky, honestly.
It does, especially if it's a rival. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think this organization has been so successful under Jeff Lurie, and you don't want anything to change that dynamic. You don't want a different person running day-to-day operations, even if he's still involved to some extent and still, But I just think any major change like that can't be good. So I think it's definitely a plus that it's not happening.
Yeah, I do too. Other stuff from Jeff Lurie, what were some of the big takeaways?
There was a lot. He talked about he didn't rule out building a dome one day. This is probably far in the future, but he wants to host a Super Bowl. You're not going to do that in the Northeast at this point without a dome. So I think it's kind of a dream of his.
And he also talked about Final Four, like big events like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I understand that. Part of me hates it. I love the idea of football in the Northeast being outside, but I also get that hosting a Super Bowl would be really cool.
Yeah, he said he doesn't like domes. He said, as a rule, I just don't like domes. He's not a fan of them, and they won a Super Bowl in a dome. So, but yeah, so he also some really interesting stuff about Saquon.
But they also might have won a Super Bowl outside.
True.
Yeah.
True. He talked about Saquon and how, really in great detail, I think everything he ever says is in great detail, about how that happened. And it was really interesting. He said, if we didn't have the offensive line we have, I'm not sure we would have pursued him. And he talked about how that line just kind of turns him into a different player than he was with the Giants. And that was a big part of the evaluation of him was, okay, he was this player with the Giants, but look at our O-line. And Jalen, and just having an athletic quarterback, which opens things up for a running back as well. So kind of took us behind the scenes of how that all transpired. I thought that was really interesting. He talked about how he's never been opposed to allocating assets to running backs, which
they have a little bit. I mean, they gave Shady, what was that, $5.25?
Yeah, that was also 15 years ago.
Gosh.
That was 2009. So, they didn't extend Ricky Waters. He was still playing well and went and had a couple good years with the Seahawks. But he talked about roster. He talked about the offseason in great detail, just everything from what went into drafting the two rookie D-backs, Becton, just everything, Zach Bond. It was very interesting stuff.
It's a good reminder that he is involved in all these decisions.
Yeah.
He's not a hands-off owner, and I know there's some hand-wringing about that.
I don't think there's much anymore.
Probably not. They've been so successful. Yeah. At a time, there was. At a time, I think a large percentage of the fan base, and I don't know for a fact, but we're probably like, hey, stay out of this, leave it up to your football guys to handle it. But they've had so much success with him involved in these decisions that he should be.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to mention that he said, he was asked about the Eagles' offense being he's always been a huge proponent of the passing game. He's always been on the cutting edge of that, even going back to before, when he bought the team, the passing game was not as prevalent. It wasn't even close to what it is now. And he was asking if, what he thinks of the way they're winning with Saquon and running a ball 45 times a game. And he said, whatever it takes to win, if your personnel is going to create this great running game. And then he said, but if you have a great running game, you're going to have a great passing game.
I don't know if that's the case.
I don't know if it's the case either.
Okay.
But he did say that, and he seemed to believe it. And he said, if you have a great passing game, you're going to have a good. And his point is, if you have a weapon like Saquon Barkley, your quarterback's going to have a better chance to complete passes because defenses are going to focus on your running back. So it was all really interesting stuff, and I'm sure we'll have stories about it over the next couple of weeks, even after the season.
That was my big question for him.
Yeah.
I know you were there and you got to ask it because, like, we've even heard the stories about the win Doug Peterson gets and Jeffrey's not happy because of the way they did it. I think maybe it's a little different this season because of just how great they've been. I think they'd be foolish to not lean into this run game, especially when you see leaning into the pass game wasn't working
right
at that level.
Yeah. And maybe, I think there is something to, and he said this as well, that, Jalen, since they became run first, Jalen's played great. And it's a very clear line when that happened during the bye week, and you wrote about that. Since the bye week, Jalen's been almost perfect.
It is amazing, like, how it's just such a stark contrast before the bye and after the bye.
In so many areas.
Like, it's that week 5 bye, when they got it, was like, man, this is too early. They're going to really hate it when they get to week 13, 14, and they haven't had a break. But I don't know if they're here without that early bye week.
I would agree with that. And when you think about, it was the perfect time to get Cooper DeJean on the field. That's when the giveaway thing just completely turned around. That's when Jalen started to be more efficient, throwing less. That's when Saquon really took off. He had some good games before that. That's when the defense really kind of found itself. You go right down the line.
The O-line going into Nick's office and saying, hey, we want to be a run-first team.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much that changed the whole complexion of this season.
They've lost one game since then.
And Jalen was injured.
For most of it, yeah.
Howie Roseman, we had actually spoken with Howie a few days before we flew down here, so we didn't have a lot for him, but there was one question left out there that I wanted to get an answer to, and that was why there were no in-season extensions, because they have guys who are certainly eligible and that they would want to sign, whether it's Zach Bond, certainly, Mekhi Becton, Milton Williams are the top ones, but Kenny Gainwell, like, there's all these guys who you would think that they'd be interested in signing, and I wondered why they didn't, and we suspected that it was for the same reason they didn't extend anyone in 22, but Howie confirmed that basically they didn't want to ruin the locker room culture because they've built it up so strong, and they didn't want jealousy to seep in. They didn't want guys playing for themselves or their stats or their contracts. And he admitted that, like, there's a negative to that, because you think about, like, a guy like Zach Bond or Mekhi Becton, they haven't gotten any cheaper.
Yeah, and Bond in particular, I think his price tag just keeps going up, and it's a risk. And I think it makes sense. I think it's probably worth the risk, and I think they're going to be able to keep most of the guys that they want to keep. Maybe not all, but...
Yeah, it's fascinating. I understand their thought process, but I also don't know, like, so there's obviously risk that if you sign someone in the middle of the season, other players get jealous. But if they sign Zach Bond, was anyone going to be like, I don't understand that?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think Howie just probably wants to make it an absolute. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to put ourselves in that position. We have such a good thing going. I think locker room chemistry is a fragile thing, and you just never know how different people are going to react. And there's other guys on the defense that aren't signed for next year. And
I think back in 22, to me, it made a little bit more sense because there were multiple guys at, like, the same position group, and I understand how that can get tricky. But for the most part, the main guys we're talking about here don't play the same positions.
Yeah. Maybe his thing is it worked last time. We got to a Super Bowl. We're going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I can see both sides of it.
Yeah, so can I. Like, I don't think there's an easy answer. I'm just thinking about, like, man, if they lose Zach Bond because of this, it will be a disaster. And I don't think they will. I think they'll sign him, but...
Yeah, it's going to cost them more than it would have in October.
Yeah. That's all I had from Howie. I didn't have a lot of time with him. But other stuff from media night, we talked about the Chiefs and who I wanted to talk to. Yeah, met up with Carson Wentz. It was good.
Yeah, it's fun. And I'm glad you had an opportunity. I'm sure he knew it was coming.
Yeah, he said, like, the minute they knew the opponent that, yeah, this is what it is. And he knew a lot of the questions were coming. Look, he has a fascinating story. And even, like, the Eagles, you can't tell the history of the Philadelphia Eagles without Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
He's a big figure in it. Whether you hate him, love him, think he deserves a lot of credit for 17, thinks he doesn't. Like, whatever the case is, you can't write the history of the Eagles without him.
And I firmly believe they don't win a Super Bowl without the run he went on during that 17 season before he got hurt in L.A. And as highly as I think of Nick Foles and the job he did after taking over, I just don't think over that stretch of games that Nick would have done what Carson did. And that's just my opinion. People can disagree. It doesn't take anything away from what he did in the Super Bowl and in the postseason. Obviously, in 13, he had a pretty good run, great run. But bless you, Dave. But yeah, gosh, there's so many just angles of this. I mean, Carson is going to be, backing up. I mean, he backed up both quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. And the Eagles drafted a quarterback that's going to win a Super Bowl. I mean, there's just so many different.
Yeah, I think the most interesting way to put it is that Carson on Sunday could watch another one of his backups hoist the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. He spoke about his time in Philly. He said he wished it would have ended differently. Now, he certainly had a role in that. It's not like something happened to him, right? But he said he has a lot of fond memories too. Like his first NFL, everything came in Philly, and he had personal things. Got married in Philly. Had his first kid in Philly.
He actually got married at the Lake House up in Upper Bucks County, not in Philly. Yeah, it's probably what township would that be? I'll have to look. I'll have to think about that.
Okay.
I actually used to go right past that place when I came back from Lehigh, the back roads, the place he got married. But yeah, and his first kid was born there. Read the story; it's really good, and I agree with you. I mean, it's it's easy to say, "Oh, Carson, who cares?" And he's been to a lot of different places. Gosh, I don't even remember Colts, the Washington. He was with another team.
Rams last year.
Rams. He hasn't done anything since he was here, really. Positive.
Yeah, he was a starter in Washington for a while.
Yeah.
He was a backup with the Rams. He obviously now backup with the Chiefs.
Had a good stretch with the Colts in the middle of the season, then that disastrous loss. But, I mean, the one thing, I think the story that will never be told is why the relationship between Carson and Jalen. I mean, you can kind of figure out why it went bad, but he's never really talked about the whole process from when Jalen got drafted to when he got traded, and that's I'm so fascinated by that. I would love to get him some truth serum, and Jalen as well. Neither one of them's ever talked about that dynamic.
Yeah, he spoke a little bit about Jalen. He gave him a lot of compliments. He said when he first got there, they already knew he was athletic, but he said his accuracy from day one really impressed him. He said kudos to him for how much success he's had. It's clear that they weren't close. They were never close. They're not close now. But he also said that in 2020 it was a little tough to forge any kind of relationships because of the COVID year.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. The Eagles have always used that COVID year like they were the only ones that went through it. Look, every team went through it, and every team didn't go 4-11-1 that year. So, I think a lot of that gets overblown. But look, I think from if you get a quarterback drafted as your backup and potentially someone who's going to unseat you and you don't even get to really know him, I could see how that would be a little tough.
Yeah, not an ideal situation.
Other stuff I got from Media 9. So this is funny because I stayed longer at Media 9. You left to go write the Jeffrey Lurie Celtics story, which needed to be written immediately. I had a chance to catch up with Jeff Stoutland a little bit to get his perspective on the 2,000-yard season. And he said Saquon is just such a selfless guy that everyone, his offensive line, the receivers, the tight ends, were all so happy to block for him this year. And I think that's a cool story of this team.
Yeah, and I think that kind of permeates the locker room. If your leaders and your best players are team first and unselfish and really have bigger goals than stats and Pro Bowls and All Pros, then that kind of just runs through your locker room. The younger guys see that, and I think that really became, we throw around the word culture a lot, but I really think it became what this team is all about. And man, every interview after that Washington game, after the NFC Championship game, every single player talked about they're not here for themselves, they're here for their teammates and their brothers. And it was. I mean, somebody asked Cam, why did you play when you were hurt? Your back, you weren't even starting. He's like, I did it for my teammates. That's the only reason I did it. And you heard that from everyone, and that's rare. People like you just don't get that. You have great teams, you have some of that, but I've never seen it this kind of ingrained in a team's existence and personality.
I also had a chance to catch up with Aaron Moorhead, the receivers coach. Kind of fascinating. So I wanted to talk to him, and a few weeks ago I did a story about the Eagles receivers blocking and how much pride they took in it. But I wanted to get his perspective on it because he's the coach of these guys, and it had to be there had to be some moments this year where it was a little weird because these receivers want the football. And I asked him if he had to smooth anything over. And he didn't want to go that far. He said not smooth anything over, but there were sometimes I had to remind the guys what we were doing and why we were doing it. And he said certainly like winning at the rate they were made it a lot easier to become a run-first team. But he gave me a fascinating anecdote. So at the end of his career, he played for the Colts, obviously. 2006 and 2007, those are Devin Hester's first 2 years in the league where he just like took it by storm. He said Moorhead lived in Chicago. He's from Chicago. He would go back there and run into Bears players, and they would talk about what it was like to play with and block for Devin Hester. And the punt return units and the kick return units all took so much pride in it because they knew that Hester at any given moment could take one to the house. So he actually brought that up to his receivers this year because they have a player like that in Saquon. And I thought that was a really cool anecdote to kind of know how he went about coaching. An unusual year for receivers.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's a great anecdote. And I give him credit for really understanding what was going to resonate with his guys and having that's very Nick-esque, having a story or an anecdote that the guys will really. And I mean, you hear them talking about their blocking all the time. And AJ's really proud of it after that one game when he had like 10 yards.
He's gotten good at it.
He is.
AJ was not a good blocker before.
Yeah.
He just wasn't. For a guy that big, he just wasn't a good blocker before.
Yeah.
He's really good now.
He is. And I think to be that good, you have to really, I don't know, you want to do it, but you have to kind of embrace it. Embrace that that's going to be part of your role, and he's done that.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. A few other guys, Mekhi Becton was soaking it all in. It's cool for guys like that who, we all know his story. We talked about the greatest stories on this team on the last podcast, but he's someone that, he's been through it. And there are a few Jets writers that, caught up with him and were asking him a bunch of questions about his time there, and he didn't really want to get into it, but it was cool to see him soak it all in. He's like, I don't even want to talk about what's going to happen next year. I just want to focus on this game and enjoy it while I have it.
Yeah, it's funny how so you're a Jets writer. You get sent down here and your paper or whatever you work for, spending all this money, and you're like, I got to get Becton. And he's like, I don't want to talk about the Jets.
No, but he was still really good about
I'm sure.
what Stoutland means to him. And he didn't talk about the Jets, but you can kind of fill in the blanks about what the support here means and how much he enjoys the support in Philly. And he very clearly didn't have that, or at least in his opinion, he didn't have that when he was with the Jets.
I mean, he said Stoutland's the first guy that's believed in him.
Yeah.
You can do the math from there.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll see what happens with him in the offseason. He said he doesn't even know going forward if he thinks he's a guard or a tackle.
Interesting.
He said, I'll do whatever. I actually asked him when he thought of himself as a guard this year, and he said pretty quick. He was able to make the mental flip pretty quick. He said physically, on the field, it took a little longer than that, but he said from a mental perspective, he was there soon after.
I asked him the same question maybe a month ago.
Oh, that's funny.
And he said, first practice. So, you get little different answers. But, we talk about Zach Baldwin and what an improbable story that is. And that's more improbable than a tackle becoming a guard. But you think about, some of the stuff that was coming out about him and his work ethic and being a bad teammate. He's been nothing but a perfect teammate and a perfect Eagle since he's been here.
Yeah, it was a bunch of wacky stuff.
I know you love that.
I enjoy it a little bit. Jameis was walking around throwing W cookies to players to eat. That was fun. Jalen got packed for most of the night. Jalen is good about he'll rise his level in media goings-ons in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, he's so comfortable in these situations, and he's been in them so many times in college, and obviously 2 years ago. He's so smooth, and he's like a 33-year-old veteran in these situations. He'll never say the wrong thing. His answers are they'll be curt, but they'll be respectful, and he'll give you a little bit of what you're looking for, but not too much.
I was proud of myself on Tuesday. There was a big crowd around him. And I was like, I'm going to get a question in. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I weaseled my way in there and got a question in.
What'd you ask him?
I asked him about C.J. Gardner-Johnson and kind of what he's meant to the team. At some point this week, I'd like to talk to C.J. So there was that really cool moment in that Eagles Unscripted where C.J. is kind of breaking down the team, and he's weirdly holding Jalen's arm up as he does it. I thought that was fun, and Jalen kind of has a little smile on his face, but he just talked about what CJ means to the spirit of this team.
It's good stuff.
But he also went in depth about how smart CJ is as a player, because and Chauncey himself has talked about this. He probably doesn't get viewed as a player even. He gets everything's about his trash talk and his persona, but Jalen talked about just how smart of a player he is, and he thinks it comes from his background playing nickel. If you play nickel in the NFL, you have a really good understanding of secondary play in general, and I think that background really helps him play safety.
So I have a stat here. He has,
unlike you,
12. I know it's out of character, but 12 interceptions. CJ's only played 28 games as an Eagle. He's the first Eagle. He was only the third all time with that many interceptions in his first 28 games as an Eagle. The last with more was Bill Bradley.
Oh, wow.
So you got to go way back before he joined the Knicks.
Anything from today's session?
I talked to Nolan Smith for a little bit. And, I asked him kind of what happened during the bye week that enabled the production to kind of really kick in. And he said, I don't really look at production. I don't judge myself that way as far as number of sacks. He said, I evaluate myself on each rep. And how did that rep go for me? And what can I learn from it? And how can I grow? He said he doesn't quantify I had 2 sacks in this game. It's a good game. And it's a really interesting way I don't think a lot of guys look at it that way, especially edge rushers. I mean, you're just, he's got 10.5 sacks since the bye week.
And normally when they have sacks, they tell you about the sacks.
Yeah, and when they don't, they tell you about the effort.
Exactly.
But
or the pressures, or the
Yeah, but it's working for him, and since the bye, he's been one of the better pass rushers in the league. So it was good to catch up with him a little bit. He's an interesting guy. He's very intense. Doesn't do a lot of interviews back home. He's
hit or miss,
and he's one of those guys that you ask him for an interview, he'll be so polite in turning you down. It's I really don't feel like doing it. I'm just trying to focus on today's practice and the game, but I appreciate you asking. So it was good to get him. He didn't have a choice today. He had to talk.
I talked to Zach Bond a little bit.
Yeah.
He said it's interesting being back because the Eagles are the home team in this game, so they're practicing at the Saints facility, the team that never really gave him a chance to play and didn't sign him in the offseason. He said it's a little weird being there, interesting, but he even said there are smells in the building that bring him back to a certain time in his life. I did ask him what the facility smells like, and he said he didn't know. He gave me a weird look, but I was how you got to say that and me not ask you?
Bring it up, you got to expect the follow-up question.
Yeah, but it is kind of cool for him. It's a full circle moment.
Yeah.
He said he's trying not to be too reflective right now. He wants to save that for the off season, but I think that him being here makes it almost impossible for him not to reflect on it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's true, and he's tried really hard to stay focused, and I think that's important. I mean, where he's come from to where he is now, it's astonishing. Mm-hmm. It really is. It's probably unprecedented. So I think you really have to kind of step back and not get overwhelmed by it, not try to come to terms with it all right now. There'll be a time for that after the game, but I think he's handling it really well so far.
I agree with that. The only other thing I wanted to mention, I ran in the market.
He's never been on a podium in his life.
No.
He's been on a podium 2 days in a row. Maybe one day back at the NovaCare, I think he was last week. But, he's got to be sitting there saying, what am I doing here? Jalen's over there. There's Pro Bowler guys. Saquon's over there. It's crazy.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, I ran into Marcus Smith on Monday night, and it was funny because I haven't seen Marcus in almost 10 years, maybe more than 10 years.
Probably,
I don't know, a long time ago. So I see him, and I'm like, I think that's Marcus Smith. Walk by him again, I'm like, that is Marcus. So I went up and chatted with him. Really cool stuff he's doing right now. He has a podcast, Circle of M. So if people don't know the Marcus Smith story, I mean, he battled with depression, suicide attempt. So right now he's trying to speak about it publicly and get other athletes the help they need. It's a really cool thing. And I was just talking to some other people about it. It's it reminds you that we're around these players and we see the humanity in them, but man, it's really cool to see him doing this in his life now.
Yeah, and it gives meaning to. I mean, he probably shouldn't have been drafted, obviously, in the first round, but it kind of gives meaning to where he was drafted and how his career went, which was not very good. And if it hadn't been for that, he wouldn't be helping so many people right now. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, he was never really meant for this, I think.
Yeah.
This is what he's meant for, and helping a lot of people.
It's really cool. We had a long conversation because the Eagles have kind of been on the forefront of a lot of this, and it's a shame for him that it happened after he was gone. But we talked about, Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson being so public about it. I told him my story about Isaac Seumalo from a few years ago at the Super Bowl. So it was good to see him. I'm glad he's doing good things. That's Circle of M podcast, so check it out. Support that.
Definitely.
All right, let's take a little break. And on the other side, we have a bunch of questions to get to from you guys.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we've got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store and NissanUSA.com today.
All right, we're back on the Eagle Eye podcast presented by Nissan. It's question time. You guys have sent a bunch of them. If you have one for us, it's eagleeye at NBC Uni. That's NBCUNI.com. If you're watching on YouTube, we have that QR code on the screen. You can scan that and send it to us that way.
I'm kind of wondering if you're going to ask the Kellen Moore question again.
I make one mistake in a year of reading questions, and you're all on me about it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you do the questions.
Sure. Be happy to.
Will you?
Yeah.
Don't think these questions will get read. All right. First one.
If they're about track, they will.
From Bob. Hey, Dave and Rube. Hope things are off to a good start in the Big Easy. As the Eagles fan base takes over the French Quarter, they say every team saves something in the back of the playbook in case they see times like these. Last week, for the first time, we were able to get a glimpse of some interesting wrinkles in the run game with jet sweeps and a toss crack on the wham trap, and it did look sharp. I think that was the first time all season they ran that in the first half of a game. My question is about trick plays, particularly special teams, and how likely they could play a factor. My view is that special teams is our weakest link, and this could be something Coach Reed could exploit to level the playing field. The Eagles are the better team, but in order to win, we have to do it convincingly with our foot on the gas. The Chiefs never get blown out, but if it's a one-score game, we lose.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I remember having this conversation with Shane Steichen. You remember that after his presser? And somebody asked him why they never run trick plays, and I said, I answered for him. I said, I think it's because you feel like you don't need to, and you save those. And if there's a point where you don't use them when you're up 21-7. Yeah. I'm sure there's stuff they have in their back pocket that they haven't shown. I don't know if it's necessarily trick plays, but certainly plays in the playbook that they haven't used. Every team is going to do that. And it's not like they're even stashing them or anything. It's just like you just don't get to everything. So there's always going to be unscouted looks. You have an extra week this week to kind of figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I'm sure we'll see some things we didn't see during the year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we even saw some stuff in the NFC Championship game, like Bob was mentioning. Yeah. So they have it in there, and I think trick plays are possible. Now, what do you think about the special teams aspect of this? There was a leaky punt pass that got thrown on them.
Yeah.
I think that is something to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. We've seen Braden Mann complete a pass, right? First down pass.
I don't even mean like the Eagles running one. I mean like them getting hit with one.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's something to be aware of. That's all the time. Yeah, I don't see Andy Reid as a guy who's going to run a bunch of trick plays here on special teams. Did do the surprise onside kick in Dallas in 2000 to open the game, and really a play that I always believed turned the franchise around. Dallas had been such a winning team, and Eagles hadn't, and it kind of turned the tables. But I just don't. You can't even do that play anymore. You can't do a surprise onside kick. So I don't think we'll see a bunch of that stuff.
I think I will put the over/under at a half a trick play.
I'll take the under.
I'll take the over.
Okay.
Next one is from our buddy Garant in Berlin. I don't remember if we said it Garant or Durant, but hey guys, you read my question on your Monday pod. Thank you. I just thought to tell you my name is Welsh, but I'm from Australia and moved to Berlin to enjoy a music career. I'm a drummer. One day I'd love to go to New Orleans. Are there any music bars that I can't miss when I get there?
I'm sure there's a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot of music venues here.
Yeah, Tipitina's is one big one.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, that's the cool thing about New Orleans, though, is like there's music everywhere, and if you don't like the band playing at a bar, go to the next one.
Yeah, kind of like Nashville. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next question is from Ross. I would have thought it was going to be big news everywhere, and Rube would have been just one of many mentioning it by this point. The Eagles' record as a franchise is now 6-6-6 and 6-6-5, including the playoffs, 6-38 and 6-39 in the regular season, 28 and 26 in the playoffs. For the first time in their existence after the NFC Championship game, the Eagles franchise is over 500. How is that not a big deal? It took more than 1,300 games across 92 seasons, but they are finally a winning team.
Yeah, the last time they were close was when they were 3-3 in 1933. And then they lost like their next 17 games. They've never been. I thought it was more significant when they're over 500 in the regular season, but certainly combined, it's an interesting note.
Yeah,
and they have a better record in the playoffs than the regular season. Obviously, since they're over 500 overall, but below, and they have to. So, it's a cool note. Maybe I'll write it this week. Maybe that'll be an observation.
Yeah, you only have, 70 more observations to go this week?
Don't remind me.
You're down to 69. That's good. Ross. Oh, no, we just read Ross. Emily.
Wait, that's in Colorado, right? Red Ross?
I am not your average listener. I'm a 30-something new mom and can name everyone on the 53-man roster. This is the only podcast I listen to. My question is, what influence do you think fans can have, if any, on the outcome of a game? The day after the NFC Championship game, I wore my Eagles hat commuting on the Metro in D.C., and not a single person said anything. If the script had been flipped and I was wearing a Commander's hat on SEPTA the day after they beat the Eagles, I would have heard a lot of nasty words. It struck me how NFL teams truly have such a variety of fan bases. Can the Eagles fans play a role in giving them an edge to win the Super Bowl?
It's so hard for normal fans to get tickets. I think the tickets are generally kind of 50-50 between Eagles fans and Chiefs fans. I do think they make a difference at the Link.
Absolutely.
I think that's real. It's one of the loudest places I've seen. Certainly Arrowhead's really, really loud too. As far as outdoor stadiums, I'm not sure how much they can do in a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think it's just tough to get the tickets, like you said.
Yeah.
It ends up kind of being 50-50, unless there's a really weak fan base, and these are two strong fan bases that are going to travel.
Yeah.
And, I don't think there's Chiefs fatigue in Kansas City because this is a chance for history, so I think they'd want to be here too.
Yeah, chance to win 3 in a row, certainly.
Next one from Joe. We've all speculated about the impact of Kellen Moore's potential hiring in New Orleans on his preparation and play calling in the Super Bowl, but what about the impact on assistant coaches underneath him? By nature, assistant coaches will be thinking about their future. Are they better off sticking out in Philly versus heading to the Saints? Do they think there's any risk that assistant coaches, position coaches, etc., are distracted by this possible move?
I don't really think so.
It's a fair question, though. What about a guy like Doug Nussmeier, who you would kind of presume would be going with Kellen Moore?
Well, he couldn't go unless he got a promotion, right? So he'd have to call plays, and Kellen wouldn't call plays, or I guess he could be OC.
Go to OC, yeah.
Now, if he's not calling plays, that would still be considered a promotion, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Nick Rallis.
Right.
In 23.
Yeah, he was a linebackers coach, became Gannon's DC.
I can tell you, Nick doesn't like the idea of getting a staff coach.
No, he doesn't.
He's very open about that.
Yeah, those are my coaches.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think these guys are so focused. I don't know Doug Musk.
Which is very funny, by the way, because he took 2 coaches with him from Frank Reich's staff.
Yes, he did.
A little hypocritical.
Yeah. I don't know if it would be on guys' minds right now. Like, I just think you're going to be if you're Doug Nussmeier. I mean, you have a chance to win a championship. I don't think he's coaching Jalen Hurts any differently this week than any other week.
Yeah, Nussmeier's the only one I think that really could be on the move.
And he's been with obviously Kellen with Dallas and with Chargers.
Like the other coaches have been here for a long. You know what I mean? Like I think they'd probably feel pretty safe.
Yeah.
Like Stout's not going anywhere. Jamal Singleton's not going anywhere. Jason Michael's been with Nick since he's poached him from Frank's staff in Indy for the same job, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that probably not a lot. Next question is Brett from Melbourne. The biggest fear I have for the game is Jake Elliott. I think offense versus defense on both sides of the ball almost cancel each other out. The rest of special teams is fairly even, but there's a massive advantage for the Chiefs in the kicking game. I can see us being on the wrong end of a high-scoring game with a missed field goal or PAT. Is this a scenario you both have considered or is likely? Thank you for a great year. I really appreciate what you do every week.
I mean, it's a fair concern. I mean, Bucker hasn't been great this year, right?
Yeah, he's had a down season, too. I think he's like 84% this year.
He's exactly 84%. He's 21 for 25.
Is it exactly 84?
84.00000. And missed a couple PATs. Yeah, you just hope not. You just hope it doesn't come down. And obviously, Jake made 2 unbelievably high leverage kicks in his first Super Bowl in 17, a 42 and a 46 in the fourth quarter as a rookie. So you want to not worry about him, but he just has not kicked well lately.
Yeah, look, if he lines up for a 50-yard field goal at the Superdome on Sunday, I think everyone's going to be holding their breath. And that's just the situation they're in right now. And I think if it's like a 50-50 decision, maybe Nick is a little more aggressive and goes for it. Maybe that could actually help them. But if it's it's a 4th and 10, they're going to have to kick. They're going to have to just trust them to do it.
Yeah, and it's a shame it's come to that point where his struggles could be affecting Nick's play calling because that's not where you want to be.
But maybe it could help, too.
Maybe it could help. But
like if you're a silver...
Like that 4th and 5, you get 45-yard touchdown. But it is a concern. And I went through a lot of the season trying not to be concerned. Oh, he's just kind of working through some things. But it's been a lot. So
it's full season.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Dave. Hey, fellas, I've been thinking about this for a while. If Kellen Moore gets a Saints job, Bobby Slowick should be at the top of the list. Joe Mixon had a heck of a year. Stroud was not as good as last year, but was fine. Nico was hurt. Tank was hurt. Diggs injured just a year ago. Slowick was a head coaching candidate after coordinating a season for the Rookie of the Year. This seems like an easy marriage. Curious on your thoughts. I think Slowick would be a good candidate. He's on the list.
Yeah, it's definitely a good name.
Nick Caley, by the way, who replaced him, I thought was a pretty good candidate for the Eagles job.
Okay.
And now he's off the board.
Yeah. No, I like Bobby Slowick.
Do you think the Eagles...
Young guy. I mean, he's mid-30s.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's another situation, though, where he could be here for a year. And then he resurrects his career and leaves.
I wonder how much Nick hiring this position is going to be like, let's just put an end to this carousel of a new offensive coordinator every year. And maybe, like if you hire a Fangio type guy, an older guy, maybe, but then you want to get the best guy as well.
You want to get the best guy.
Yeah.
And if, either way, they're going to have a chance to compete for a Super Bowl next year. They're going to have the talent.
Yeah.
And you have to give yourself the best chance to do it, even if it is another one-year guy.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tricky thing to figure out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they already have their short list. I'm sure they've gone through it. They're going to hit the ground running whenever the Super Bowl ends. And if we think Kellen Moore is going to take this Saints job, they have to be ready.
Yeah.
All right. Who's next here? Michael. I want Milton Williams to remain an Eagle. With Josh Sweat maybe exiting, will the Eagles keep this great, underappreciated defensive lineman?
It's going to come down to money. Obviously, Milton might want to go somewhere else. And, he plays a lot, and he's a starter, kind of.
Yeah.
But he might want more. And it's not going to happen here, probably.
I actually struggled when I did my every player on the roster story because I did starters and the non-starters. And I had to put Milton in the non-starters, which is silly because he plays more snaps than one of the starters.
Right.
But he's only started 7 games this year.
Yeah, that's why I say he's a quasi-starter.
Yeah.
I think he's a good player. I'd like to see him back. I think it's a really valuable role that he's in, and I think his, when Jalen Carter's doubled, he takes advantage of those situations a lot. I don't think he's a disaster if he's not here, but I'd like to see him back.
Yeah, he's not going to be the number one priority to sign.
And that's why I think maybe he won't be back.
Yeah, and I think he's going to get paid. He had the sacks this year. People finally saw what he can do production-wise.
Yeah, 5 sacks.
Yeah. And I wonder if Moro Ojima's ascension this year and giving them quality snaps plays a factor at all either. Like, he's probably ready to get a bigger role.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, want to do a few more here?
Yeah.
Next one is from Thomas and Nora.
In where?
Thomas and Nora.
Oh, Thomas and Nora.
Hey, Reuben Dave, watching your pod, getting ready to head to NOLA this weekend. My daughter and I watch your pods together. We were wondering if you had to pick a most unlikely MVP of the Super Bowl, who might that be? Jake Elliott, Nolan Smith, those were some of our guesses. Make sure you get yourself over to Molly's Rise and Shine for breakfast one of these days. Best breakfast in the city and a super cool vibe. Keep up the great work.
Molly's got it.
I will try that.
So, and I've told the story before, but 2 years ago, or 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when we were in Minneapolis, whenever the heck that was, I was joking around with Corey Clement during the week at one of the media things saying, I'm one of the MVP voters, so if you have a big game, maybe, give you some shine. And then he goes out, has 2 of the most incredible plays you've ever seen, the 55-yard catch and run to set up the Philly special, and then obviously that 22-yard touchdown in the back of the end zone with like 10 guys around him. And, then I see him in the locker room after the game, and he's like points at me. He's like, "Did you vote for me?" I'm like, you only vote for one. Like, if it was top 3, obviously Nick Foles got my vote. Thought he deserved it.
He had a pretty good game that day.
Had a pretty good game. It might have been Foles, Ertz, Corey Clement, possibly.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question. Defensive guys never get. Is Richard Dent still the last defensive player to get MVP?
Oh, I don't know.
It would be kind of cool if Jalen Carter has 3.5 sacks or something and gets in the mix. Could see that happening. But if it's an offensive player, I would say like Devontae would be. I don't know if that's but because he's kind of in AJ's shadow, and but he's been a really good postseason player. Even Goddard would be in that. I'll go Goddard as my surprise MVP. He's been a really good postseason player.
Surprised you go Kenny G.
I got to wait till
it'd be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Goddard or Devontae would be the likely ones. They have Jake. A kicker's not going to win it.
No.
He'd have to
make a 70-yarder at the end of the game.
And the defensive players are really tough too. Look, I think Nolan has a good matchup in this game. We'll talk about matchups later in the week. But, he would have to have 3 sacks.
Yeah. Which could happen.
Could happen.
Yeah.
And
force a fumble.
Most likely defensive player for the Eagles.
Most likely defensive player. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go CJ.
Oh,
just
interesting.
with a pick 6.
Wow.
Yeah, like a pick 6 and maybe a couple pass breakups. Yeah.
I didn't think you were going to say that. I'd go Zach Bond.
Yeah,
I think he could fill up the stat sheet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it takes more than just filling up the stat sheet.
Need a game-changing play.
Yeah.
He makes such impact
he
plays.
does. Yeah.
All right. Couple more here.
It's fun, though.
This one from Avery. Good afternoon, fellas. Birds fan here behind enemy lines in Kansas City. I'm wondering what it is that makes Zach Bond so elite. His play clearly pops on the field, but what attributes does he have that sets him apart from the abysmal linebacker play we've seen out of previous Eagles defenses? P.S. I absolutely loved the pod, but I started listening during Jalen's first year, and I wanted some outside, unbiased evaluation of his play and whether or not he could be the guy moving forward. You two have truly furthered my Eagles fandom.
Oh, that's very nice of you to
nice.
say. What's his name?
Avery.
Thanks, Avery. I guess Avery could be a woman or a man.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I just think he's got great athleticism. He's got obviously tremendous range, and he's a rangy guy. He's intelligent. He can run. I mean, he's a prototype for
Big, fast, and strong is a good place to start.
Yeah, and smart.
Smart, good eye discipline.
Yeah,
which is like a kind of a trait of a lot of these middle of the field defenders. The Eagles have Cooper Jean has it too.
Yeah.
But really strong eye discipline. Doesn't get trapped. Doesn't get out of position. He's always in position to make a play, and it's not an accident. That doesn't happen by chance.
That's a good way to put it.
Last one here is from Constantine. Hey, Dave and Ruby, you're the best. Catnip question. If candidate Matty P replaces Kellen Moore, would a move like that skew the talent balance too much from the players to the coaching staff, like a supernova that outshines an entire galaxy? Could the NovaCare complex itself handle that level of brilliance? Actual question, what positions do you think the Eagles target in the early rounds of the draft?
I like the first question. Edge.
That's top of the list, right?
Yeah.
They have Nolan Smith, which is great, but not getting much from Bryce Huff. Josh Sweat is going to be a free agent. Brandon Graham is 36 and probably going to retire. It's an important position. They got by this year without an elite guy, but you gotta replenish.
Yeah, I think that's number one on the list. And what else? I think it's a position they don't draft often, but tight end. Yeah, I think that's a priority. And like that Penn State kid, but he might be out of their range. But yeah, I mean they don't draft many, but when they do, I mean when you go Selleck, Ertz, Goddard, I mean that's pretty good. And sorry, Clay Harbor, I know you watch our pod, but
Calcaterra too.
Yeah, later round, but I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right, you got anything else before we wrap this one up?
I don't.
I only sneezed once. I'm pretty proud of myself. I feel another one coming on though. So let's wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. We're here all week. For Rube, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye presented by Nissan. We'll talk to you soon.